Hi guys. Um, so now we are doing the last two parts before we do World War II, which is fascism and totalitarianism, and can't remember what 8-7 is called, but oh here, and the political and ideological factors that resulted in World War II. I can't remember the name of the unit. Sorry. So, okay. So, fascism and totalitarianism, always fun. So, it's interesting. People love to use the word fascists. Like they love to call people fascists, and it's not a word you should use lightly. I can explain the factors that led to the development of fascist and totalitarian regimes in the aftermath of World War I. The ideology of fascism, with roots in the pre-World War I era, gained popularity in an environment of post-war bitterness, the rise of communism, uncertain transitions to democracy, and economic instability. It's funny, and we did this in junior seminar last year, and I don't know, maybe we'll play this video when we get back. But now fascism has a negative connotation, as it should. But if you called someone a fascist, or they told you, "Hey, I'm a fascist," it wasn't negative before 1939. Wasn't a big deal. Maybe even not before 1941. It wasn't such a big deal. So it was only with the beginning of World War II that fascism became a dirty word. So fascism was on the wrong side of history. So, and of course, with our liberal values, and we know the end of the story. Fascism was horrific, and we know the end of the story. So, fascist dictatorships used modern technology and propaganda that rejected democratic institutions, promoted charismatic leaders, and glorified war and nationalism to attract the disillusioned. There's a term that you need to know. It's called cults of personality. Cults of personality, and that's when people are more interested in the person than in what they necessarily stand for. So they like what the person is, how they say things, than necessarily what they say, how they get things done rather than what they're doing. Mussolini and Hitler rose to power by exploiting post-war bitterness and economic instability, using terror and manipulating the fledgling and unpopular democracies in their countries. I'm low on battery. Gotta get battery. Okay. I can explain the consequences of Stalin's economic policies and totalitarian rule in the Soviet Union. After Lenin's death, there was a power struggle, power vacuum, but Stalin eventually took control, and he undertook a centralized program of rapid economic modernization, often with severe repercussions for the population. His modernization came at a high price, including the liquidation of the kulaks. So this is a term you should know. Kulaks are land-owning peasantry and other perceived enemies of the state, devastating famine in the Ukraine, purges of political rivals. Purges are when you just get rid of people, and ultimately the creation of an oppressive political system. So, what are these conservative and authoritarian and radical totalitarian dictatorships? And what makes them different from like previous things that we've studied? Because all we've been studying are, we've studied absolute monarchs. So, what makes something different? What makes a totalitarian dictatorship different from an absolute monarch? So, um, so the tradition it's down here basically. So the traditional form of anti-democratic government in European history did rely on obedient bureaucracies to control society. So like Catherine the Great or Metternich, they did jail their political opponents, but they didn't care about their subjects' lives necessarily. So like in a totalitarian state, they want total control over their subjects' lives, over their citizens' lives. So where were there fascist governments? There were fascist governments in Italy, in Germany, in Spain, Portugal, Austria, Hungary, and Romania. But you really just hear about Italy and Germany for the most part. So what is totalitarianism? Totalitarianism is used to describe radical dictatorships. And you can have a totalitarian government on the right, you can have it on the left, and it uses violent repression and intense. Here, let me show you what I'm doing. Just so you this. And intense propaganda to gain power, and then they try to dominate the economic, social, intellectual, and cultural aspects of the individual's lives. So this was forged during the atmosphere of the total war during World War One, because remember, World War One, they wanted everyone to be involved, they wanted everyone to join, and then as the war became unpopular and nothing happened, they're just on the line, and the lines aren't moving during the battlefront. They needed to keep people coming and fighting, and so this was what they did. So there's characteristics of communist and fascist dictatorships. You can have a communist dictatorship, and you can have a fascist dictatorships. So you have rejection of parliamentary governments, intervention in the economy, rejection of liberal values and civil liberties, the rule of a charismatic ruler like Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler, censorship, mass propaganda, policies of imperial expansion, which is interesting because, as I told you, like with Lenin was very against this, but Stalin was all for it, and massive projects of state-controlled social engineering to replace individualism with the united people. Like, you need to do this for the country. If you don't do this for the country, you're working against the country. So in terms of communism and fascism, communism sought to create an international brotherhood of workers by nationalizing private property. So remember, nationalizing private property means they take your property and say it's now the government's. So that was what happened with the kulaks. They industrialized rapidly. This was because, remember, during World War I, they were kind of embarrassed on the military front, and collectivizing agriculture. Fascists sought to build a new community on a national, not international level at first. They intervened in the economy, but they didn't try to abolish private property or class distinctions. So, but all the different classes were to work together for the country. And then in terms of fascists, really focused um, on on building a country based on homogeneity and selective breeding of human beings. Specifically, the Nazis were very focused on this. Communists denounced eugenics and racial engineering. Communists and fascists were sworn enemies until they weren't. Bum, bum, bum. And then they were again. Okay, so in Spain, one of the places with fascism, there was in 1931 there was an ousting of the King of Spain. Reformers created a republic with a liberal constitution and took land and privileges from the church and old ruling classes. So there was a general named Francisco Franco, and he launched a revolt against the Democratic Republic in 1936. And if you can see a pattern here, you can see places, this started when we were talking about in the Soviet or in Russia with the provincial government. And you see these fledgling democracies get, they're not strong and they get taken over by either communist governments or by fascist governments. So a conservative general named Francisco Franco launched a revolt against the Republic in 1936. And this launches the Spanish Civil War. And the Spanish Civil War is very complicated and long, and it's worth studying. Unfortunately, I don't really have time to get into it, but you have the nationalists, who are the fascists and the right wing, and they supported conservative Franco. And then you have the loyalists, who are communist, socialists, and those wanting democracy, and they supported the republic. So, the Spanish Civil War is so it's called the dress rehearsal for the wider European war for World War II. Hitler and Mussolini sent arms and forces to support Franco, while the Soviet Union sent soldiers to help the loyalists. And eventually in the war, this is going to get a little confusing in a little bit, but eventually in the war, the Soviet Union in World War II is against Hitler and Mussolini, Italy and Germany. So the Nazi leaders used the war to test new bombers. More than 500,000 people died in the struggle. And by 1939, Franco had won, and he created a fascist dictatorship similar to those of Germany and Italy. And because of that, though, Spain mostly stays out of World War II. So that's pretty interesting. I just want to show you something quickly. This is a very famous painting of it's called Guernica, and it's by Pablo Picasso. And if you can look at it yourself, that would be better, because now there's like too many things on the screen. But it was made in 1937, and it's an anti-war painting, and it is in response to the bombing of Guernica by Nazi Germany and fascist Italy at the request by the Spanish nationalists. So it's a very, very famous painting, and the bombing of Guernica is a famous event. So so if you see this painting, you can have some context for it. So this is Mussolini. This is an image of Mussolini near the Colosseum, trying to show himself like a Roman emperor. And this is a famous image of Stalin, and look how he's like the father of Russia, or the Soviet Union at this point, and how everyone loves him. I'm just making sure I didn't forget to show you guys something.